So I've had a series going on my channel where I've been covering 25 secrets you may not know from every Pokemon generation. It's been a bit since the last episode, but we are picking it up today because the next generation we have to cover is Kalos, and with Legends ZA being a thing now is literally the best time to pick things back up and get this series going again. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into some Kalos secrets you may not know about. So to start things off, we definitely did not expect the return of Kalos right now with Pokemon Legends ZA, just like you may have not expected the return of the glorious Folkachi trading card. That's right, back by popular demand, the special promotional trading card of my mascot Folkachi is making a return to my merch store. With every order of the Folkachi plush, this special promo card will be included for free as not only a thank you to you guys for all your support, but also to hype up the upcoming Histrobi Chronicles TCG that's currently being worked on behind the scenes. The TCG project is going to be insane along with the Histrobi Chronicles video game, of course, so this is a great way to get an early taste of it. Also, you'll only be able to get this special alt art Folkachi card as a part of this promo, as it won't be made available anywhere else. So be sure to hop on the opportunity and pick one up at histrobishop.com with the link in the description. This card is as amazing as any TCG card I have seen, not to mention the plush is amazing too, and it all helps to support the channel and my content and more cool projects just like this. So give that a look with the link in the description, and a big thanks as always to all of you for all of your amazing support. Okay, so let's begin with a pretty recent one that actually comes out of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. In the Indigo Disc DLC, the director of Blueberry Academy, Serrano, wears a scarf that is actually patterned after Honedge. At the time of the DLC's release, this seemed a bit out of left field, but knowing what we know now with the reveal of Legends ZA, which came just a couple of months after the release of the Indigo Disc, it was likely an intentional tease at what was on the horizon with Legends ZA's reveal, which is pretty cool. And speaking of Kalos connections in recent games, a couple more come from Pokemon Legends Arceus, which is naturally all the more curious. Commander Komodo wears a suit of armor that very highly resembles Wikstrom's of the Kalos Elite Four, and Gayrick, one of the Wardens of the Pearl Clan, is implied to be an ancestor of Wulfric based on his appearance. Again, at the time, these seemed like random inclusions, but now they seem a bit more significant and less coincidental with Legends ZA on the way, and possibly could be another homage or a bit of foreshadowing. On the topic of Wulfric, while he's not a very fleshed out character in X and Y, in his concept art there is some more interesting info that we can learn about him. It reveals that within the locket that he wears around his neck is a picture that depicts a woman and two children, along with a Bergmite. This seems to imply that these people are Wulfric's wife and two kids, with the Bergmite possibly being his Avalugg as well. This would ultimately be confirmed later on in Pokemon Masters EX. Bergmite is the subject of this next secret as well, and it's a spicy one, or should I say, icy one, because there is actually evidence that Bergmite and Avalugg have a cut middle evolution. According to cut content website The Cutting Room Floor, the models of the Kalos Pokemon within X and Y are named using an internal index order that is separate from the national Pokedex order. This reveals a couple of interesting things, including a removed model within this order that was evidently going to be placed in between Bergmite and Avalugg, suggesting that these two originally had a middle evolution that was scrapped from the final games. The other interesting thing that this internal order reveals is a possibly cut legendary Pokemon. Kalos is infamous for only having 3 legendaries to its name, but there is another missing model within this internal order that sits right between the Kalos legendary Pokemon and the Kalos mythical Pokemon. This suggests that there was possibly going to be either an additional legendary or an additional mythical Pokemon in the Kalos region's dex that apparently got cut for some unknown reason. I mentioned Wikstrom earlier, so let's go back to him for a bit. In his official artwork, Wikstrom is holding a Pokeball that doesn't resemble any currently known Pokeball, other than arguably the GS ball, with it being yellow on top and white on bottom. This is pretty interesting all on its own, but it's made all the more interesting because it could potentially be a really roundabout tease to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which were the next games in line during X and Y's release. This is because Glacia, who is also an Elite Four member from the Hoenn games, just like Wikstrom is in X and Y, also holds a Pokeball in her Versus sprite that is yellow on top and white on bottom. According to Bulbapedia, this is the result of color palette limitations for the original Hoenn games, and due to Wikstrom also having this unusual Pokeball, and also being an Elite Four member from the games that preceded the Hoenn remakes, where Glacia appears also as an Elite Four member, it's possible that this was a tease all along to the Hoenn remakes. Now we're going to switch gears for a sec and look at the anime. One of the wilder anime facts of all time comes from the X and Y anime, as the voice actor for Lysander, Tyler Bunch, is also the voice actor for Elmo's dad, Louie, on Sesame Street. Another crazy fact from the anime comes from an interview with Tetsuo Yojima, who directed many of the episodes of the X and Y series. According to him, the character Alon was actually inspired by Anakin Skywalker, and if you take a closer look at him, you can actually see the inspiration quite clearly. Alon starts out as Professor Sycamore's assistant, much like Anakin trains under Obi-Wan Kenobi, but eventually goes to the dark side and starts working for Lysander later on. Getting back to the games though, X and Y introduced the driver trainer class into the games, and a fun thing about them is that many of the drivers' names are themed around cars, like Carter, Weaver, Coupe, and Cabo. A similar thing also happens with the also introduced in Generation 6 Roller Skater Trainer class, where many of the roller skaters' names are themed around roller skating, like Dash, Rinka, Kate, and Roland. While most trainer classes have identical overworld models and accompanying artwork, some have minor differences between one another, such as hairstyles, which could be indicative of a last-second design change that was not updated on both the art and model. This is even more apparent on one of the tourist trainer class models, where the differences are more significant, and the Garçon trainer class, where the designs are completely different between model and art, making this all the more likely. There's also a particular lass that can be found in the Santaloon City gym who is named Charlotte, and due to the web-themed gym puzzle of this bug-type gym, it is likely that this is an intentional reference to the book Charlotte's Web. And on the topic of trainer classes, Pokemon X and Y actually has a couple cut trainer classes within its data as well. These would consist of the Ace Surfer class, which, as the name implies, would have likely been a water-themed version of an Ace trainer, and the other cut class is the Swimmers, which is a double battle version of the standard Swimmer, and was eventually used a generation later in Pokemon Sun and Moon. Another weird piece of cut content, if you can even call it that, is the Fairy Gem. The gems are a group of items introduced in Gen 5 that correspond to each of the types, but they have not been made obtainable past the Unova generation. In Gen 6, with the introduction of the Fairy type, a corresponding Fairy gem was also created, but it has never been obtainable in any game since its creation due to the gems being exclusive to Gen 5 to this point. Another similar situation involving an item in X and Y has to do with the Shalor Sable. The Shalor Sable is a local delicacy of Shalor City in Kalos, similar to the Lava Cookie of Hoenn or the Castelia Cone from Castelia City in Unova. There's a funny thing about this particular delicacy though, and that is the fact that despite being a Kalosian specialty, it cannot even be obtained in X and Y without trading for it, because the first games where you could naturally obtain the Shalor Sable are instead Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Meanwhile, a funny Kalos-related quirk that you can view right now, or at least at the time of this video's recording, involves Diancie. If you go onto the official Pokemon website and look at Diancie's Pokédex page, you can see that it erroneously states that Diancie's gender can be either male or female, even though Diancie is a gender-unknown Pokemon, which is correctly stated for its Mega Evolution. It seems like this error has been up on the website for a little bit as well, and has remained unnoticed and unchanged. So who knows how long it'll actually take for it to eventually be noticed and fixed. Now let's look at some other interesting Kalos Pokemon facts. Due to Delphox's fire type and its witch inspiration, its overall design could be partially inspired by witch hunts and how those who were convicted of witchcraft were often burned for their quote-unquote crimes, which is actually a pretty intense inspiration if you ask me. Another starter Pokemon, Chespin, also has a cool design trait as well. You don't often see it, but Chespin has a brown spot on the back of its head that feels like it's a bit random in its placement. However, this is likely inspired by Bendor spots, which are similarly random markings that horses can get, specifically of the chestnut breed, making for a bit of a pun since Chespin itself is based around actual chestnuts. Another cool feature regarding the inspiration of a Pokemon, and it's the kind of thing that I personally love, involves Slurpuff. Slurpuff is known as the meringue Pokemon, but is also obviously based on a dog. This combination may seem a bit random, but it likely has a reason for being so, as there is a kind of slowly baked meringue that is known as a pet, particularly within France, which Kalos is based on. This is likely the reason, or at least part of the reason, for the dog meringue combo that makes up this Pokemon, which I personally think is pretty cool. Let's take a look at a location within Kalos now and highlight Azure Bay. Azure Bay is based on the English Channel, which borders France and the UK. And in the games, it has an interesting map description which reads, "The deep blue ocean off Kalos' coast, where Pokemon from distant lands are said to visit." The usage of the term distant lands is interesting here, because not only does it allude to this place being based on the English Channel, but if we look to the Galar region, which is Pokemon's equivalent to the UK, many of the Pokemon that can be found in Azure Bay are also found in the Galar region as well, which is actually quite significant given the dex cut that occurred during that generation. So even though Galar wouldn't come around for 2 generations after X and Y, it was still sort of referenced in an indirect way in the Azure Bay. Another interesting location in Kalos is the Lumiose Museum. There are many fun things to see in the Lumiose Museum, including art, as you might expect. However, what is cool about some of the art on display is that it's actually the art of cards from the TCG. This includes paintings known as Forest Guardian, which comes from the Aquapolis expansion, Fossil Excavator from the Mysterious Treasures expansion, Mr. Briny's Compassion from the EX Dragon expansion, and Town Volunteers, which also comes from the Aquapolis expansion as well. Later on in the game, you'll eventually come across Snowbell City, which is the site of your final gym battle, and it's also where you can meet the father of your rival. There is an NPC in this city who you can talk to, who is heavily implied to be the father of Calum and Serena, depending on who your rival is. This is because, when talked to, he mentions his kid who also set off on a journey from Vanderbilt Town just like you, and who is apparently also around your same age. He also refers to his kid as the opposite gender of your own, and it's even implied by Professor Sycamore earlier in the game that your rival's parent is a veteran, which this NPC also is, making for quite the bombshell revelation. This next one concerns a story from X and Y from one of the developers, but I thought it was kinda funny and also a bit sad given X and Y's history, so I wanted to go ahead and share it. On the 3DS, there are a bunch of Pokemon-related themes that you can apply to your system's home screen to jazz it up, and there are themes that were created for each of Pokemon's evil teams up to that point, except for Team Flare. The guy who drew all of these themes, Hitoshi Ariga, revealed on Twitter that he was going to draw a Team Flare theme, but development was moving over to the Switch at the time, so he wasn't able to because of timing. The reason that this is kinda sad is because it's not the first time that X and Y got the short end of the stick in this way, as it's also likely the reason why we didn't end up getting a Pokemon Z during the Gen 6 era before we moved on to Gen 7. And now we're gonna round things off with a couple more cool pieces of cut content. Courtesy of the cutting room floor once again, a cut key item exists within X and Y's data known as the Common Stone. What it would have been used for is unknown, but its sprite is accessible to us along with its description, which says, a perfectly normal stone that might appear valuable to some. It's all in the eye of the beholder. This seems to imply that this stone would have been part of a side quest of some kind, where you'd have to track down a person who would really love this stone for some reason and give it to them. It seems interesting, so it's a shame that it was cut. Additionally though, there's also evidence in the game of some cut terrains as well. Terrain is a mechanic that was introduced in Gen 6, but it seems like there were originally going to be more terrains than what we got. Within the data of the games, alongside file names for the other terrains, are two files whose names are Fwaza Aqua and Fwaza Ice, indicating that a water-themed terrain and an ice-themed terrain were likely planned before being scrapped for some reason. As terrains go, they seem like they would have fit in perfectly, and we all know that the ice type could definitely use a boost, so it's a shame that they were cut and still have not been introduced to this point. With that said though, those were 25 Kalos secrets that you may have not known about. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, and also be sure to subscribe if you haven't yet for more Pokemon content. With that said, I will be back very soon with another new video, and until then, as always, thanks so much for watching this one, I really appreciate it, and I will smell you guys later.